Okay, so now we are going to jump into illustration, and it all really just starts with a simple cube, and we've already kind of created one, so we're just going to use that as a base. But before we actually start drawing, we have to bring in our sketch. So I'm going to just show you a quick technique that we use to make things as easy as possible. So go ahead and just create a new layer, and I'm just going to call it sketch. I'm going to put it below our art file, our art layer. And I'm just going to change its color so it's a little bit different than the red that we already chose. And then we're going to go ahead and in that actual layer, place the sketch. And it's going to look a little something like that. So right now you can see that's in this specific layer. And what we're going to want to do is turn back on our grid and try to really just align it up with the grid as much as possible. And you can kind of see that since we used the template that actually had the grid already in place, that at some point it will actually really align nicely. I'm just trying to get it so that it actually lines up with these corners here. So you can see the outer edges that I drew. That's a good way to kind of like make sure that it aligns. So I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. And it just takes a little bit of wiggling, but you can see that really aligns with the grid here. This will make it easy for you to actually use the grid with your sketch. So I'm going to go ahead and change its transparency to something a little bit lower. Say like 60%, so it's not that visible. And I'm going to lock it and go ahead and turn off my grid for now. So you can kind of see how it's in place. What's going to happen if you start drawing over this on your art file is you can see like I can just create shapes within our palette that we created. And you're just basically drawing on top of it, but you can't see it. So in order to avoid this, we're going to actually target this layer right here, this little button right here, click on it, and then click multiply. Now we can draw on top of our illustration and not have to worry about not being able to see it. All right, so the first step really to get started, like I said before, is to start using the cube that you already created. So let's go ahead and just like grab this cube, group it, and this will be kind of like your building block, literally, for creating this entire city. So for example, if I were to bring this in and try to line it up to this building, you can see that I'm almost making this building complete just by using the exact same cube. Obviously, it's not the same exact shape, but we can customize from here. So what I'm going to do is actually turn on my grid and try to line it up with the grid first. So right now, if I were to grab the corner of this, I can actually bring it into the corner of the grid. And you can see that how it's aligning here is pretty good vertically. But you also may notice that it's not going to be as tall as it's not going to be as long as the building. If I were to actually grab just these nodes up the top here by using my white arrow tool and selecting just the top, I can bring it up to this level to be this tall. But it's not quite the same shape. So this is just kind of a series of using either the lasso tool or the white arrow tool to customize your cube and make it exactly what you want. So right now I have the right height, but let's make it a little bit deeper. Again, that's just grabbing the right nodes. So I'm going to grab this node and then these two nodes. And you can see if I were to do that, I can make it as deep as I want. But use the grid to make sure that you're kind of staying within the rules of the isometric line work. So right now I'm just going to bring it to here so that I actually am sticking with the grid as much as possible. And then what I'm going to do is just finish this out and do it to the other side. So now that I have the main buildings in place, I'm going to use the exact same technique to create these little top areas of the buildings. And you can create your own guidelines on top of the guidelines that are already in existence. So right now I want to have this like little box on top of the building. And I also want to make sure it looks centered onto the building. So if I turn on my grid, you can see that I'm not like aligned to the grid perfectly in this area, but to make sure that you're aligned to the illustration, you can actually use your own shapes to create new guidelines. I'm going to go ahead and use this exact shape by duplicating it first. So go ahead and grab it with your white arrow tool and copy and place. So you want to just do Command C, Command F. That makes it so that in the same exact place, you just duplicated the exact same shape. And then from there, I'm going to hold down Option and Shift and reduce down its size to be centered to itself. And just so you can see what it looks like, I'm going to make that blue. So that's basically creating a footprint of this new shape that you're creating. And from there, I can go ahead and just build out this actual like unique rectangular cube thing. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a guideline for myself by just going into Command 5. And you can see that it's sitting in there within the grid. So that's a good starting point for you to take the cube that you already created, get it into place. And for the sake of being able to see it, I'm actually going to change the color of the cube. So let's go ahead and make this white, this gray, and I'm going to make this a darker blue. And then I'm going to just place it into this area so that I'm going to grab a corner and drop it into that guide that it's created. And using the same rules that we just went over, I can actually go into this actual shape and customize it. So that's how you would make a top. You can also obviously make it longer or wider or whatever you'd like, but I'm going to do the same thing with this area here. So now that we have our main shapes of these two buildings in place, I kind of want to plan out the city a bit more before we get into more complex shapes. So I'm just going to go ahead and build my road. And this is a good opportunity for anybody to start laying out their city, and the road is kind of what dictates where everything's placed. So you can kind of see how I have that laid out in my sketch. I'm actually going to turn on the grid to help me make the road. So you want the road to be kind of aligning with the actual grid here. I'm just going to start drawing in with the pen tool a simple road using the actual grid. And let's go ahead and make this darker. And I also want to create a cross street. Now, obviously this cross street is going behind this building, but I still want to draw it. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this building for now by doing Command 3 and draw this road right here. And then you can bring back your building if you'd like, but one thing I really want to make sure is that you can see that there's some alignment issues here. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure my building's all grouped together so I can move it, but just grab the corner with your black arrow tool and slide it into that corner. You'll see that little tiny like upside down V to ensure that you're actually going to a tangent. And we can zoom in, you can see that everything's nice and aligned. As one last step, to add a little bit more complexity to this road, I'm actually going to want to add a sidewalk. And in order to do that, I'm going to make a couple quick moves, and this is just how we usually handle stuff like roads. So basically, I'm going to grab both these streets, I'm going to unite them in the Pathfinder tool so they're one shape. So once you have this as one shape, go ahead and add in a stroke and make sure that it's aligned so that the stroke is on the inside, not the outside or the middle. And that will allow you to grow a sidewalk within the street. Now you can see it pretty much works, except it creates these little areas right here. There's a couple ways to handle that. You can either expand this out and have it in its own clipping mask, or you could expand the whole shape out and customize it yourself. But for the sake of this illustration, I'm actually going to just make it bigger. And the way I just did that was by grabbing these nodes and waiting for the line extension to actually align with what it's doing. So you can actually make it as long as you want, but as long as you're getting that little highlight, you know that you're going at the right angle. So I don't even have to have the grid on to make sure that this street gets bigger. I just need to use the white arrow tool and make sure it's aligning. And let's go ahead and create a base behind this whole city. And it's going to look a little something like this. Kind of working a little blindly here. I'm going to turn off my grid. And let's go ahead and make this gray for now. Go ahead and use that exact shape to kind of use things as a clipping mask. So what I'm going to do is take this shape, copy and place it in place. I'm going to take this road that we just created, send it to the back so it's behind the shape we just created, and then grab both, and with the right click, you're going to be able to make a clipping mask. And that way it sits inside that shape and the sidewalks are actually going past this perimeter. So for this portion of the illustration, we're just kind of focusing on really basic shapes. Anything that can be created by using your pre-existing cube. So this includes skyscrapers that are just taking the cube and making them taller. You can also make your cube like wider if you want to make more of a warehouse. We made the cube actually turn into more of a tapered building by just grabbing certain nodes and making them smaller. This is also a really good opportunity for you to start laying out the city, like anything that's flat, ground level, like the base of the whole city, the streets, or even the coastline if you want to get into that now. And next we're actually going to start creating something a little bit more complex. Since isometric angles are very specific, what would it take to take something that has more of a rounded edge and turning it into a isometric angle? And we're going to be actually using the 3D rotate tool to do that.